All right, I guess we'll get started. My name is Jeffrey Way. I work for Envato. I'm a web developer. I tweet all the time about Laravel, so I've lost many of my friends. I had this funny thing. I was going to play the funny song from Arrested Development and hand out shirts. And then I found out there's no audio, and then I forgot the shirts. So that slide is non-existent. All right, quickly, at a glance, like I said, my name's Jeffrey. I'm based in the United States in the South, in a little mountain town called Chattanooga. I work for Envato, and you probably know Envato in two different ways. Who here is familiar with the Touch Plus network? Nice. It took 5 years to get to that point, but Touch Plus, we've been a huge supporter of Laravel. I like to think, kind of in the commercial education place, there's no better place to go than Touch if you want to learn about Laravel. So that's something I'm very proud about. What my day job is I work for Touch Plus Premium. Any premium fans here? Nice, that's good too. I'm the head producer. I do a lot of educational content there. Once again, we do tons of Laravel stuff. So here's an example. Basically, we just do, like if you like video learning, we do courses on stuff that you actually use. Like if you want to learn how to use Dreamweaver, lynda.com is great. But if you actually want to use tools that we use, then use good stuff. So like, if you want to learn about how to write artisan commands, we have an entire course dedicated to that. We were covering Laravel 4 while it was in beta. So Taylor would release something cool like form model binding, and then it would go up here 2 days later. So it's a really great way to learn, I think. We have a lot of instructors in the audience. So we have Mr. Machuga. Where are you? Mr. Machuga did this course. This one, you build one project twice. So he built it in Rails, and then he built it in Laravel, and then you get to watch and see which one do you like better. We also have Mr. Yusuf Van Veen. I don't think you have a Laravel course for us, but he does a lot of content. Not yet, but he did a lot of CodeIgniter stuff, and I think we're pulling him around to Laravel. If you'd like to be an instructor, come talk to me after this. Okay, also, I'm the writer of Laravel Testing Decoded. Unfortunately, in the PHP community, there just isn't that much emphasis on testing. We're way behind. Like, if you look at the Ruby community, it's just part of the culture. It's ingrained in them. If you're not testing, you're going to be mocked. In the PHP world, we're getting there. We've come a long way in the last 5 years, but we still have a ways to go. So, I don't know, is this tacky? If you want to buy the book, you can get it for 50% off. I don't know, maybe that's tacky. Anyways, use the coupon code Laracon. All right, final thing, and then we'll get into the presentation. What I'm working on right now is a site called Laracon. And this takes the idea of visual training, I think, to the limit. So it's specifically Laravel, and it's like if you were to take documentation and put it into visual form. So if you want to learn, how do I send email? How do I write migrations? How do I use schema? How do I use the IOC container? It's just nonstop videos for Laravel. And this is something I don't think it's been done well enough for any other framework. You have like Railscast, but in the PHP community, I don't think this has ever really been done. So I'm excited about that. That'll be out in late September, but you know how coders are, so kind of double the time limit, so maybe October. All right, and I was trying to think about how I feel about Laravel, and this was the best slide that I could think of. Laravel allows us to do amazing things. So in this case, it allows you to skydive into a slip and slide. That's like, Laravel, we can do things that would normally take days, but with Laravel, it's like 5 minutes. By the way, who was the person that did this? This is amazing. I want to be friends with him. Before we begin, it's hard. I once heard somebody say the only difference between the guys up here and the people in the audience is that the guys up here are speaking. That's it. We're all still figuring this stuff out. So please don't take anything I say as like law, especially with testing. We're figuring this stuff out. The PHP community, Sean once said in one of the podcasts, it's kind of the awkward year for testing in PHP, and it's true. Like we have all of these tools and we're trying to figure out what's best, but I don't know, if anyone tells you a law or if anyone ever tweets and says, if you don't do this, you're an idiot, don't listen to that. That's terrible advice. All right, show of hands. Who here tests their code? Half of you are lying. Okay, keep your hands raised. Who here does, okay. Who here does test first development? Okay, that's good. All right, put your hands down. Who here, be honest, who here thinks testing is just a little too overwhelming, and at the end of the day, you got to get work done, and you just don't have time to do it. All right, double that number, and that's probably more realistic. I hope this talk will be a little bit more like the connecting glue. So we have a lot of talks that are like, here's how to use PHP unit, and here's how to test the calculator. And that stuff is good. Like, everyone learns unit testing with the calculator at first, but it doesn't really help when you're into it and you just don't know what you're doing. And then we have those tests that are very art-based, the art of testing, the theory of testing, and that is great at a high level, but once again, when you're in the thick of it, sometimes you just want to know, like, how do I do this? How do I do that? So I hope this test will help. All right, so I see 3 phases to testing in PHP. We all know this phase. For some reason, everyone starts with resistance. I don't know, it's like it's built into us. Whenever we learn something new, our first reaction is to push it away. No. We don't even give it 5 minutes, just, no, I'm not doing that. Why? Smarter people than us, people who have dedicated their lives to us, will swear by testing, but so many of us are just quick to say, no, it's not for me. But I think a lot of us get to this point where you accept it. Okay, maybe it would be helpful. And then we go to phase 2, overwhelmed. Especially in PHP, there's just so much. I have no idea what I'm doing. I want that picture of the dog where he's like, I have no idea what I'm doing. That's kind of how we all feel, even if we don't admit it. And then you get to phase 3, and this is once you've gotten through that second phase and you've realized how beneficial it is. You've realized that point where it was Friday at 4:58, you ran your tests and it failed, and if you didn't have those tests, it would have gone into the weekend and you would have never known that there was a bug in your project. Tests allow you to sleep better at night. But I'm not gonna lie, testing is hard. This is how I kind of still feel, and I wrote a book about it. I love this. Yeah, testing, I don't know, like we see so many articles and videos where they talk about, testing is easy. And the basic idea of testing is easy. When I find 2 + 2, then I expect the total to be 4. That's easy. But none of us are building calculators all day. We're doing other stuff, and we don't understand all the different jargon that's associated with it. So some testing confusions, like best practices. Once again, we have all these laws. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. We're still figuring this stuff out, and they don't allow for context. When they say, if you touch the database in your test, you're an idiot, what does that mean? Are you unit testing? Are you functional testing for acceptance? Like, do you need context here? Next, how much to test? So we know, okay, unit testing is good, but do you do outside-in testing? Do you do stress testing? Do you do just general QA testing? We don't know. This stuff is, when you have like 10 different layers of testing, and a lot of us are just 1 or 2 people teams, that's tough. But why does it have to be that hard? Why do we have to have all of this jargon? I hate this about our communities. All of this stuff, it's like jargon to make us feel more important. It's jargon to make us feel like we're really smarter than the rest of the world. And that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be, let's make this stuff as easy as possible to understand. So I think developers should be like astrophysicists. Who here knows Neil deGrasse Tyson? He's an American physicist. I kind of have a man crush on him. I love him. Go on YouTube. He's like the best speaker I've ever seen. But he says, the most accessible field in science, from the point of view of language, is astrophysics. What do you call spots in the sun? Sunspots. Regions of space you fall into and you don't come out of? Black holes. Big red stars? Red giants. So people who study the universe can create terminology that everyone can understand. But for some reason with developers, we don't. It's like we try to think of the most confusing jargon that no one could possibly understand. I hate that. We should be like Google. Google acknowledged this. Google has so many people that come from different frameworks and communities. So what they do is they cut away all of those different styles of testing, like system, end-to-end, functional, unit, integration, and they just break it down into 3. So generally, your small tests will convert to like your unit testing, and your large test would be more like your acceptance testing. And I think this is smarter. Keep it simple. Everything. We always talk about keep it simple in coding, but then when it comes to terminology, it's like the more confusing, the better, because it makes us feel better about ourselves. So here's what I say. When you're first getting started, ignore all the jargon. Ignore the best practices. Just test your code. Even if you are breaking some cardinal rules, just test your code. As the saying goes, it doesn't matter how you test, just as long as you do test. So here's what I hope. I'm going to go over lots of tips and tricks and pitfalls. There's going to be a lot of them. I don't expect you to take all of them in. Just pick 2 things, just any 2, and try to adopt them into your projects. All right, for the beginners, should you really test? And this was that phase 1 I was talking about. A lot of people think, yeah, it'd be nice to have tests, but I don't really need to do it. My answer is yes, and you already do test. This is what we don't talk about. We see all these articles about, is testing helpful? Yes, we all test. You've been testing since you were 4 years old. When I turn this knob, the door opens, and then we learn that. Every time you've ever filled out a form and you click the submit button and you expect to see some kind of notification panel at the top, you were testing. So everyone agrees testing is good. The only question is automated testing good? And why would the answer ever be no? Or think of it this way. Why would it ever be a bad thing to have this huge group of tests that back up everything you write? I can't ever see a situation when that would be a bad thing. And then, of course, there's other reasons to test, other than it makes us feel good. In some situations, it's absolutely required. Like imagine you're contributing to Laravel. You submit a pull request for Taylor. And you just say, this fixes so-and-so bug, but you don't provide any tests. So what do you expect Taylor to do with that information? If you don't have any tests, what's Taylor going to do? Is he supposed to download it and try it in every possible way to see if your code might have accidentally broken his? No. You write a regression test. And that's where you write the test, and you basically, it's the easiest kind of test to write. You describe what the bug is. So when I do this code, it should do this, but it doesn't. You write the code, then you do the production code to fix it, and you're done. And now Taylor can look at that pull request and go, oh yeah, that's not working. The test passes, all of my tests return green, so I can merge this in. Next, another thing, us newcomers always talk about, is testing helpful? But we forget testing in many ways is a mindset. So what everyone finds is when you force yourself, especially with test-first development, we're not going to talk about the advantages to that. Mostly we're just talking about testing today. But when you follow test-first development, it makes us not be cowboys. And that's one thing like in the PHP community. We're getting away from that, but we're still cowboys in many ways. And by cowboy, I mean you just dive in and you start coding. You don't step back and you think about, how do I want to design this? And when you have to write tests first and you need your code to be testable, it forces you to actually design your application, which honestly people don't do as much. And then finally, testing is fun, guys. You arrange your code, you act on it, and then you write an assertion. You make the test turn green, and then you start over. It's a fun way to code. And of course, you sleep better at night. All right, where do I begin? Let's dive into some of the various jargon. PHP unit, de facto standard. You have to use PHP unit. But next, we have these tools like codeception. And this is where I was talking about the overwhelming phase. We have codeception and PHP unit and Mink and Behat, and it goes on and on. It's no wonder why people don't do it more. Mockery. What the heck is mockery? Another one of those words to make us feel better. And then this is one thing that I come across a lot. I do a lot of teaching, and people always say, I want to test, but how do you unit test a CRUD app? And if we're talking about unit testing, we're talking about testing in isolation, but a CRUD app is kind of difficult to unit test. Think about it. If you're using maybe an ORM, well, now you're kind of linked to that. So really, most of the time, you're writing integration tests. So most people just want to start out. This is what we all build. Our first app is the blog. It's the to-do list. And then we want to test that, and we're told unit test on Twitter, but what exactly do you unit test with that? So here's what I always tell people. Learn the basics, learn the calculator, do all of that grunt work, but then write acceptance testing. Why would we ever learn how to test by diving in and learning all of the intricacies of testing? No, just replace your manual tests with automated tests. So acceptance testing, think of it as outside in. So if you were to replicate what you're normally doing, if your customer says, I want to be able to log in so I can access private info, then you would write an acceptance test. The only problem is people try to do this with PHP unit, and PHP unit just wasn't really designed for that. So think of an acceptance test as a test that describes your client's expectations. So like I was saying, you don't just unit test. You have many layers of testing. You'll have an acceptance test that describes, think of it as the end goal for a particular feature. But then you're going to back that up with little unit and integration, and you kind of build up this test suite. So it's possible, actually, on this note, if the acceptance test is from the point of view of the client, you could be green with unit and your integration and your functional tests and still fail the acceptance test. Which means, by the way, that the acceptance test wasn't properly written the first time. All right, so here's what I did. At the last conference I spoke at, I did all this live coding, and it stressed me out beyond belief. So we're just going to do this as video, and then I'm going to narrate it. And it's just a minute, don't worry. So here's an example of how you could write your hello world acceptance test. We're going to use Codeception here. So I update my is better play, or this is my nightmare. Yep, nightmare engaged. Can we do it like this? You've got to be kidding me. You bastard. No, it's local. Okay, well, next slide. All right, imagine you saw that and think about how that made you feel. All right, be careful. Acceptance tests are a great way to get into it, but you start to learn, and this is where I was talking about, like, you start with acceptance testing, but if we begin by adopting all these best practices that we see on Twitter and articles, then you don't learn how to avoid the pitfall. You just learn that that's a pitfall. But if you come across this naturally, you'll do acceptance testing, and then you'll begin to see, oh, you know what? This isn't enough. Because when that acceptance test fails, you're just going to think, oh, I can't do anything with that. It fails, and somewhere in my project, I had broken code. But an acceptance test isn't a good way to show you that. And that's why we layer it. I'm so mad that video didn't play. Okay, let's talk about a pitfall. This is another question that comes up. Should my test touch the database? On Twitter, people say no. What does that mean? Unit tests shouldn't touch the database? Should functional? Should acceptance? Should stress testing? It doesn't help. We need scope. So the answer is it depends. So here's some recommendations. In some situations, you got to touch a database. Maybe you're not unit testing, maybe you're not testing in isolation, but maybe you are testing from the outside in, and you will want a database. So if you can get away with it, and I stress, if you can get away with it, try to use a SQLite database in memory. Now, let's say your normal app uses MySQL. In some cases, that won't translate over well, but it depends. I think for small to medium-sized projects, you'll be okay. So this comes in 3 steps. 1, we configure a SQLite test database. Laravel makes this incredibly easy because when you run PHP unit in a Laravel app, if you actually take a look at the test case that all of your PHP unit classes extend, it's going to set the environment for you to testing. So that means all you have to do is within the config folder, within the testing folder within that, override database.php and set your new settings. It couldn't be simpler. I love it. 2, before each test, because this is a database in memory, you're going to migrate it. And that way, every single test method is executed in isolation. And that's you never want to do that. You never want to have a test method that depends on state that was set by the previous method. That's a code smell. So this way, if we migrate, we're always working with the same code. And then proceed per usual. Just write your tests and rest assured that it's being run in memory. Let's see if this works. Let's see if I refresh. I hate you. These were good videos. Like, why isn't this playing? Let's see. I'm not going to do it. I'm too scared. Okay. Imagine how that video made you feel, and let's continue on. All right, here's a tip. Factories. Jargon. More jargon. Factories give you just a basic way to rapidly set up test data. So an example. Here's what I would call like the poor man's solution. We're just going to use Eloquent here. So we're writing, let's say, a functional test, and we need something in the database to compare it against. So we're just going to call, let's say we have a lesson model. Imagine this is Tuts Plus, and you have lots of lessons. So we're just going to call lesson create, give it some fields, and that will save it to the database. But this isn't ideal, because imagine that 3 months down the line, you run a migration to add another field, and that field is required, then all these tests are going to fail because you didn't set that field. So you're going to have to go back and update your tests. It's better, if we can, to use a factory. And there's lots of factories, just search Packages. Here's one that I made. And in this case, we're just going to call factory create. And what that's going to do is it's just going to automatically set the fields to random data based on the type of the field. So if you have a field called age and its type is integer, then it's going to set a random number. And this way, at all times, it's automatically filling up those fields. And then below, if you do need to override it, like imagine this is saying, given I have a lesson that has a title of override title, then when I do this, when I act, then I'm going to write this assertion. That's much cleaner than manually filling up rows. And then finally, factory create. Oh, I'm sorry, here are some examples. And this is basically taken from Factory Girl, migrated to PHP. So you do attributes for, and that's just going to return an array. It's not going to save it to the database. It's just going to give you an array of random data. Second one, this is going to use dynamic methods. Again, not save it to the database. And 3, if you call create, that will set those fields and also save it to the DB and return the model. Let's try it again. I'm very upset about that. All right, here's another example. Imagine here, this test, what this does is imagine you're searching your website. And basically what we're saying is if what they search for is actually the name of a tag, then I want to return all lessons, in this case lessons, that are associated with that tag, if that makes sense. So we don't just want to search through like the title and the body area for the word. We also want to see if that's a tag name, and if so, return all lessons associated with that tag. So we begin by creating a factory, and we're going to set the title to title1. Then we will create a tag. Then we're using pivot tables because a lesson can have many tags and a tag could have many lessons. So Laravel makes this incredibly easy. Lesson, get the pivot table, attach the tag. Amazing. Then we just go from the outside in, if we wanted to. We could do this as an integration test too, by the way. But we could say this, make a get request to search/work, and then we're going to expect to see that title. Simple. All right, let's move on. This one is a maybe. Reaching for the reflection API might be a code smell. Who here knows what the reflection API is? Okay. Actually, the reflection API is very cool. In fact, Laravel uses it for some of the automatic resolution stuff. When you're within your controller, you say, like, this controller expects this interface. Laravel is actually using the reflection API to figure out what it is you want there. However, for testing, I think it's a bad idea. I've never once used the reflection API for testing. So, why? Well, think about it. Basically, what the reflection API can allow us to do is, let's say you're writing a test, and you want to test this private method, because this private method is doing a lot of work. So with the reflection API, we could basically go in there and just say, convert this to public, and that way I can test it. So from that point of view, it's kind of cool, right? But I think it's a bad practice. The fact that you have a private method that is doing that much work that you badly want to test probably is a better indicator that that code should be extracted to its own class, and then you can make it a public method on that class. So use the reflection API if you know what you're doing. Otherwise, maybe you need to refactor, and maybe you need subclasses. All right, pitfall. I still don't know how to mimic the end user. So we have lots of things, like DOM crawler. That's a Symfony component, and that allows us to, like, let's say you want to scour the DOM and say, I want to make sure that these list items contain this data. Symfony's DOM crawler component can do that very well, and Laravel pulls that in by default for you. So when you write a test, you immediately have access to that. Next, for browser, we could use Mink, and this is another one. Mink is confusing, and you go to the website, and you still don't exactly know what it does. Well, basically, we have these things like Goot and Selenium and Zombie.js, and all of them are valid. They have their uses, but they each have their own API as well. So what Mink does is it basically wraps all of those up so that you can use one API, and then you can just swap the ones you want to use in and out. You could use Selenium if you want, just standalone Selenium. That would be an option. Or you could use Codeception, and behind the scenes, Codeception is actually leveraging Mink. And I love Codeception. And here's a video to show you how it works. So just imagine you're taking it in. Oh, one cool thing about Codeception is it very much takes a basic point of view. So your variable for your functional or acceptance test in Codeception is I. So I am on page, and then you give the page. And I expect to see this. None of it's like class and assertions. It's just almost how your client would say it to you. When I fill this field, and I fill that, and I click the submit button, then I see this. It's as easy as it could possibly be. And if you're really trying to get into this, try to use Codeception. All right, let's talk about mockery. Everyone know what mocking is? Half of you are lying? Okay. Mocking is, all right, let's say we're unit testing, and we want to test class A, and class A depends on class B. Well, if we just want to test class A in isolation, then mocking allows us to say, all right, I'm not interested in class B. I'm going to mock you. I'm going to fake you. And then I'm going to inject a mocked version of class B into class A. And that way, we can just write expectations on what should be called on class B, but we're only actually testing class A. Let's talk about mock objects. Jargon alert. It's nothing more than just a way to simulate the behavior of a real object. That's it. We don't actually want to call or reference the object. We just want to simulate it. So here's an example. Imagine we have this class called monthly billing. And what that should do is maybe a cron job calls it. And it's just going to filter through all active members. And for each one of them, we're going to call the charge method. So imagine that I wasn't injecting those two interfaces here, and we were just instantiating it. Well, there would be no way to test monthly billing without also testing member repository and billing interface. We couldn't do it. But because we inject this now, we can then mock those two dependencies and test this in complete isolation. Here's a test that illustrates that. So we're going to begin by mocking our repository interface, and we're going to write an expectation. So we're just saying, I expect the active method to be called once, and I don't want you to hit a database or anything. I just want you to return an array to me. Then we're going to mock our billing interface, and I'm going to say, I expect you to have the charge method called twice, and then we're just going to act. We're going to instantiate monthly billing with the assertion that these two guys are not the actual classes. They're just mocked versions. They're faked versions. Now, something that you'll learn from experience. Mocking is great, but mocking can sometimes be bad, because sometimes you come back to a test you wrote 6 months later, and you're doing all of this mocking, and you have absolutely no idea what it does. I don't know, this is a tough one. This is one where you just kind of have to measure how much you want to do. Sometimes mocking can be an anti-pattern if you do it too much, because mocking inherently knows about your implementation code, and that's just kind of a basic bad thing in testing. So I'm not saying don't mock, but be careful that if your tests become unreadable, then you're more likely to abandon that code. Trick. Anyone know about aspect mock that does not follow me on Twitter? Shame on you guys. Anyone that knows and does follow me on Twitter? Come on, guys, we're at a conference. You need to know about this stuff. All right, aspect mock is really cool. So imagine that in your controller, let's say you have a user model, eloquent model, and let's say you want to get user all. Well, we know that if that's in a route closure or in a controller method, you can't test that. And so Taylor says for large projects, you can use repository pattern. And then once he did that, like 50 articles 50 articles ended up on the web saying you need to use repository pattern. I've done it too. You want to be careful about that, because sometimes, if we're honest, for small to medium-sized projects, you can know with pretty good certainty whether you're ever going to swap your persistence layer out. So let's say, okay, we're only ever going to use MySQL and Eloquent, so we don't need to allow for that level of flexibility. But a problem we do have is, up until now, we had no way to test user all or user find one. It's just the way PHP was built. PHP wasn't really designed for testing. Now, with aspect mock, we can do that, though. So let's just say test double, that eloquent model of ours that comes with every Laravel installation. And we're going to say if an all method is called, just return foobar. This was never possible before. This is a very, very cool thing. So now when we call user all, foobar will be returned. It's very cool. And here's a video demonstrating that. That was going to be about a minute. All right, but a lot of people say, but the only reason for dependency injection isn't for testing. Well, people disagree. Some people would say specifically, dependency injection allows for testing. And other people would say, no, it encourages the decoupling of your code. And you know what? Both of them are right. So, jargon alert, once again, dependency injection. Scary word, it means a basic thing. I love Nicholas Zakas's definition. Dependency injection, or as it's also known, passing arguments. That's it. Why do we have to complicate it? It's just passing arguments to a constructor or a setter method. Why do we have to complicate it? I hate it. But I think you do, yes. You want to be practicing this. Even if you can use tools like aspect mock, that's not the only reason you would ever use that. So here, take a look. We're also taking advantage of the dependency inversion principle, but we'll talk about that shortly. So here, we're injecting these two dependencies into the class. That's it. The only difference is we just don't want that new keyword to show up within the class. That's an easy way to think about it if you're confused. Just make sure that you don't instantiate a class directly within another class. So when I was talking about how testing lends itself nicely to good structured code, this is what I mean. It makes you think about the single responsibility principle. Should this class be responsible for that? Or another way is this class should have one reason for changing. And when we're testing our code, it actually makes us think about that stuff a lot more than we would before. Remember, I think some people have this idea that a small class is a bad thing. The smaller your class, the better. You're not going to see a big class and be happy about it. The smaller the class, you're going to enjoy that much more. All right, if you want to learn more about the dependency injection, where's Dale? Dale's been doing these cool GitHub projects. Has anyone seen them? You're at a conference. Follow Dale. He does these cool things where it's on GitHub, and he'll take one project and he'll split it into like 15 different folders, and each folder is the same project with just one small tweak. And so here he covers dependency injection very well, I think. So make a note of that if it's still a little blurry to you. All right, let's talk about the D in solid, the dependency inversion principle. So dependency inversion, confusing, jargon, makes us feel better. All this means is code to an interface. Your code should depend upon an abstraction rather than an implementation. So here's an example. Here's some random method with a terrible name, and we're going to instantiate Stripe billing within, let's say this is our controller. This is bad for two reasons. One, we're not leveraging dependency injection, so it's not easy to swap that out with a mock when we need to. And two, we have linked our controller to Stripe. So what if down the line Stripe starts charging through the roof and you want to switch over to Braintree or PayPal or something? Well, now it's going to be a lot harder because your controller and Stripe billing, they're connected, they're best friends. And the controller doesn't need to know anything about that. The controller just needs to know, hey, I need some way to bill, give it to me, that's it. So should the controller know about Stripe? No. Here's a better example. Now, within the controller's constructor, we're going to inject not Stripe billing, but an interface. This is the dependency inversion principle. So now the controller is just saying, hey, I need some way to bill. Give it to me. It can be somebody else's job to decide what to do. And now when it calls the charge method, this controller has no idea who is in charge of billing. It could be PayPal, it could be Stripe, it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to know about that. So now we create our implementations. We have an interface called billing interface, and here are the two implementations. So at the beginning of your project, you're using Stripe, so you create your Stripe implementation. And once again, if your interface is only one or two methods, that's okay. It's not like in order to warrant an interface, you need 10 methods. No, that's okay. One method in an interface is okay. And then down the line, when Braintree becomes cheaper than Stripe, you write your new implementation, and then we tell Laravel that when you need an instance of billing interface, rather than using Stripe or whatever, you would just swap that one line of code. And now, instantly, your controller is going to be using Braintree instead of Stripe. This is a good way to code. Can anyone tell me when I have 5 minutes left? Thanks. Now here's how this is helpful. The dependency inversion principle, how does that make testing more easy? Once again, we now have such an easy way, now that we are using mockery, to swap in a mocked version. So now we're going to mock our interface. A lot of people think you need to mock the concrete class. No, just mock the interface. And now we're going to say we expect charge to be called. And now this third line here, this is where the magic happens. We tell Laravel, when you need an instance of billing interface, I want I want you to use my mocked version instead of the actual implementation for production. And then you just run your test. All right, let's talk quickly about Laravel's IOC container. This is something I think is confusing to people. It's jargon, IOC container. Too confusing. Here's a quote from Mr. Otwell over there. Let's talk about it. So we've learned that dependency injection is a good thing. However, one downside to dependency injection is then you end up needing some place to store all of these bindings. So now I can't just instantiate this class. I have to instantiate this class and pass in that dependency and that dependency and that dependency. So the IOC container gives us just a nice place to store those, and it also has a lot more sugar on top of it. So here we're saying app bind acme foo. Think of that again as a way of saying when we call app make acme foo, it's going to return the acme foo object with an acme bar dependency. Now you don't have to do new acme foo, new acme bar, et cetera, et cetera. Now here's another way. I was talking about automatic resolution. I talked about this a bit at my last talk at Laracon. So here we're saying within the constructor, we need an instance of billing interface. And now Laravel is going to do its best to automatically inject that for you without you actually having to do that. However, we're being smart here. We're using that dependency inversion principle. We are coding to an abstraction. And now when you were to if you were to run that in the browser, Laravel is going to say something like not instantiable. Because think about it, Laravel's smart, but it doesn't know what implementation of your interface to use. We have to tell it that. So we're doing that right there. App bind billing interface, and we're going to use Stripe right now. All right, let's talk about one more thing. Testing system functions. This is something that a lot of people have trouble with. So what I mean by a system function is like file get contents. We kind of learned you can't test that. Well, you know what? You can. One way, of course, is just to create a wrapper class. Or this by itself is testable if we just use a bit of trickery. So imagine that we wanted to test this function, return file get contents. Well, think right now how you would test that. You could create the file, but then we don't actually want to be calling these functions or file put contents. We don't actually want to call that. So here's another method we could use. Imagine that our class has a namespace of acme. Well, the way PHP works is when it calls file get contents, it's first going to see, do I have a acme/file get contents function? And if so, I'm going to call that. If it doesn't, it's just going to default back to the global one that we all know. So here's how we could test this. Now within your test class, assign it the exact same namespace that the class you're trying to test has. And now we'll just set a stub. We'll say acme file get contents, and we'll just return stub. And now, if I scroll down, when we call this method, we can assert that it equals stub. Now this is just a basic example, but it's going to hold true for any global or system functions. Set a namespace, override the function, and have it return whatever it is you need to. And now anywhere in the class you're testing, when it needs file get contents, it's always going to return stub, and you don't actually have to worry about that. All right, this is my last slide. So I was talking about how everyone has different ways of doing things, and we're all still figuring this stuff out. So don't take anything I've said as law. Trust no one, Mr. Mulder. Any X-Files fans here? Speaker talking about X-Files on stage, Doric. What I mean by that is figure all of this stuff out for yourself. Don't take what somebody says on Twitter or somebody on stage says and think that you immediately have to do it. You need to make this stuff work for you. And then, like I said, the more you do it, you're going to start to learn how to avoid the pitfalls rather than fall into them. And that's it. Questions? Dale? Make it an easy one.
Do I need a button? No, I'm good. Cool. I just wanted to say, when you were talking about like keeping things simple and not trying to sound like smarter than we are by giving things stupid names, like I just wanted to like come on stage and give you a hug. But I'll do that later.
Thank you.
But when you're saying that we're still like figuring stuff out, do you think there's a point at which we'll need to sort of collaborate and kind of build a standard around that? I hate using the word standard, but
Yeah.
once we're done experimenting?
We kind of are. All I mean by that is I think sometimes all of these best practices that we talk about for people who are just getting started in testing in PHP, and that's the majority. Like go back to 2007, what percentage of PHP developers were testing in '07? It's probably the low single digits. So this is all still new to us. So I do worry about people saying this is a law when we don't know yet. Things that, like here's a good example. Some people would say a unit test is one class in complete isolation. Other people would say, no, that's absolutely not true. A unit test is just a small group of classes that are directly related. So people can't even agree on basic terminology. So I do worry about assigning laws. But yeah, I think we do. And I think we already are at this point. It's just, I don't know, I guess my view is I do so much teaching that I want it to be as easy as possible for people to get into it. But the problem is people create all these best practices and complexity that isn't overly useful when you just want to get started testing. Who else?
Here we go. Sorry. Yep.
Thank you, man.
One of your first slides was the question, if you've just got like a really simple CRUD app, what do you test? And now that you've gone through all your slides, like what's the conclusion to that? Would you just go like for a few simple acceptance tests or?
Depends. Look, some people would say, like Uncle Bob, he's gone on and said something like, if you don't practice test first development, you're not a professional. It's a law. I don't like that. Testing is for you. It's only for you and your team. So what would I test within a CRUD app? Well, first, if it's a small CRUD app, maybe I won't test. Look, let's just be honest here. Some projects, it's not warranted. But if this is a larger project, then yeah, I would have some acceptance tests that would define. For example, if I go to the tags page, then I expect to see all lessons associated with a tag. I would write an acceptance test for that. What about, let's say I have some methods defined on my Eloquent model. Well, I want to test those. And here's another example. If we are unit testing the Eloquent model, we're not using repositories or anything. How do you unit test that? How do you test that in complete isolation? What you end up doing is if you try to go that route, where you're basically writing a test that ensures that the method you're testing calls a function, and that's it. And how helpful is that really? So in those cases, I would write a set of integration tests that would confirm when I call this method, then the result is what I expect. But again, like, there aren't rules. It's test enough to make yourself sleep at night.
So you said that using mocks a lot is bad, right?
No, please don't say that. Mocking is good. Too much, I'm just saying be careful that in 6 months you come back and you have no idea what that method does. And I have enough experience to know that when that happens, we are just that much more likely to kind of abandon the test and let the tests go red and we just kind of ignore it because it's too much. We just got to make this change. But now, because the tests and the mocks, like I said, inherently knows about implementation code, that makes it a lot easier. It makes it a lot more difficult to change in the future. But mocking is good.
Yeah, mocking is good, but I kind of face that problem in my tests, in the unit tests where I write. I tend to mock methods a lot, and then the test becomes unmaintainable. And so how can I avoid that? Means, what should I test in unit tests?
That's a very loaded question. Honestly, I can't answer that question for you on stage. What I can say is, if we only follow these rules when testing that everything has to be mocked, then you're less likely to test. So test enough to make yourself feel better and make yourself be able to go home at the end of the day. And then when you do need mocks, it needs to be your decision, not that you're doing it because everyone else tells you to do it. Yeah. But you know what? This thing that you're talking about where the more you mock, the more unmaintainable your tests get, that's a big issue in the testing community right now, and people are talking about it. And that's why I say we don't want laws because we're still talking about this stuff.
Okay. And one
more
question.
We can talk more after, though.
Yeah, cool. One more question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Instead of using interfaces and dependency injection, binding things to interfaces, I tend to go with facades.
With facades?
Yeah, I create services and facades and service providers.
Mm-hmm. And that way you could say facade should receive?
Yeah. I kind of avoid all that constructor arguments and stuff.
But still behind the scenes, you're mocking.
Yeah, behind the scenes, yeah, I can really swap that thing out. And I find that approach better. You got anything to compare
I think it's a
these
lot.
two?
I can't imagine I would do facades for everything. If I'm just creating a facade so I can mock it more easily, I don't know.
No,
I'm not sure that I would do that. What he's talking about is all the Laravel facades. Taylor actually added some sugar there where you can say facade should receive. And then if you take a look at that method behind the scenes, it's actually calling mockery there. So it's just a little bit of sugar to make it easier. I'm not sure if I understand exactly what you mean.
Suppose, like you show that billing example with billing interface.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You would create a facade? Yeah, you
Yeah.
could. This is just an example. This isn't necessarily linked to Laravel. These are basic testing tricks.
Yeah. What I really wanted was basically any comparison between those two means. Are there any pros and cons of using dependency injection and interfaces, and compared to when using facades?
It's one of those things. I think it depends on the project, honestly.
Okay.
It really is one of those things like you have to decide for yourself.
Okay. Cool.
Anyone else? Ben.
Yeah, so I was just going to sort of chime in. One of the things you said before about designing your classes so that they're smaller and you break your methods down, I found through doing all the stuff that I've been doing the last sort of 12 months, that makes reducing your mocking. That helps you reduce your mocking because you're making your methods smaller. You don't have to mock so much stuff that's going on behind the scenes.
Yes.
You just do it. That thing does its thing. Add them all together, and it works. So it's more of a comment or just a little.
No,
chime in.
it's very valid. We don't evangelize that stuff enough. The smaller the class is always a good thing. Every time you can take a method and extract it to, even if this other new class has one or two methods, that's a good thing. The smaller the class, always the better, and it's immediately going to be more descriptive of what you're trying to do, and it's inherently going to be more testable.
I'm one of those people that's at the overwhelmed stage of testing.
You're in the majority.
The thing that scares me most is things like mocking. Mockery itself, I find the syntax a bit complicated. I mean, when you do mockery mock, and then you specify an interface. I mean, I feel like with the should receive afterwards, I feel like it should be a one-liner where it's a little bit more simplified, but I suppose that's for naming.
So do you think
purposes.
because mockery is confusing, you test less, or you're less
Yeah.
likely to test?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. We have all these best practices, but we don't have a good way of teaching people how to get into it. We just throw everything at them. And then we act surprised when more people don't test. It's too much. So I would say, don't mock at the start. You will learn when to mock, but at the start, just test it. Get it to work, and then you'll start to see the pitfalls for yourself. Rather than other people telling you what the pitfalls are, you will see for yourself what they are. And then you'll learn more about mocking. But yeah, it's not the prettiest thing.
I have to say I'm quite excited by the aspect mock stuff because that just looks a lot easier to do.
Aspect mock is very cool. It's actually getting a little bit of criticism, but I think it's the same thing, like immediate response is resistance. And it's like, maybe give it 5 minutes and look at the code before you say it's awful. It's very cool. Who else?
Hi.
Hey, man.
Yeah, testing with the database, I'm a little bit confused about using raw queries in Laravel. Like, there are certain cases where, unlike SQLite, MySQL have some functions, like, which I used to do the, like, doing a select query, setting up the set.
You're saying how do you test that?
Yeah, set columns, like fixing of value.
Uh-huh.
When doing that, testing with the database, I was thinking like I have seen generating the string of the query and testing against the string as assertions. But what's your suggestion about it?
My suggestion would be, look, maybe that's following the TDD cycle, that you are not allowed to write this code without testing. A lot of people disagree with that. I think it's a good idea, but I don't think it's the only way you can write your code. So if that's the idea, like I'm not allowed to add this little method that does basically nothing unless I have a test to back it up, who is that helping? So I started getting better when I realized testing is specifically for me or anyone else that I'm working with. So if I don't need a test to verify that this thing that's basically just ensuring that it's written correctly works, then I won't write that test. But for other things like you're just wanting to verify that a SQL query works, can you just compare it against the output from the database?
Well, if the database is not really ready.
Okay. And then in that case, you end up with those situations where you're verifying that this method gets called. And it's like, how helpful is that? But that's the thing, this stuff is hard. Like, I don't immediately have answers to some of this stuff. It's hard. Go ahead. One more? One more question.
Yeah, it's me.
I can't see anything. Wave your
Yeah,
hand.
it's me.
Hey.
I want to ask is if code exception is the right tool for testing Ajax, AV, or single pages applications.
Yes, you can do all of that. Codeception is very cool. Not enough people are using Codeception. It's kind of flying on the radar. All we hear about is PHP Unit and the hat, which is very cool. Codeception is a little more developer friendly though. And it also adheres to what I was talking about. How can we make testing as simple as possible? I think Codeception does a really, really good job of that. So yeah, you could definitely do that. You can test APIs with Codeception. You can write unit tests with Codeception. It's not exclusively for outside-in style testing. And yeah, one more? It's up to Sean. Go ahead. Sorry, Sean.
Question about codeception and acceptance test.
Mm-hmm.
I do kind of a lot how I can, like advice, how I can speed it up.
You can't. That's the problem.
Exactly. I have
that's
like
the pitfall.
150 tests.
Start with acceptance testing, but you're quickly going to realize, oh my gosh, these acceptance tests take minutes to run. And then that's where you start. Like if you only started with acceptance tests, you would naturally learn that you need to create unit and integration tests because they take so long to run. And then when something does fail, you don't exactly know where the bug was. You just know it didn't work as expected. So that's where you need to start layering it with lower level unit or integration tests. And that way, when it does fail, you can see specifically which unit failed. That didn't answer your question. Did that answer your question? Okay. All right, that's it. Thank you.